case. This bill is totally unworkable. Our judicial system of 94 different federal judicial districts could not handle the tidal wave of litigation that would necessarily follow. If you do the math, and you just had one person for every federal district in the country, it would take 12,220 attorneys to replicate the work of the original case, and then 12,220 defending prosecutors for the Department of Justice. Do the math. This is wholly unworkable.
The fluorescent lights of the House Judiciary Committee room cast harsh shadows across Jamie Raskin's weathered face as he bent over the thick document marked H.R. 5053, No Rogue Rulings Act. His wire-rimmed glasses reflected the harsh text as his index finger traced the lines of Section 3B, pausing at words that would reshape American justice forever. The camera would zoom in on those words, pulsing with significance. Nationwide injunctive relief shall not extend beyond named parties. The phrase sat innocuously among paragraphs of legal jargon like a cancer cell hiding among healthy tissue. Raskin's jaw tightened imperceptibly. This wasn't the technical judicial reform the Republicans claimed. This was something far more sinister, a surgical strike against the constitutional safeguards that had protected millions of Americans from unconstitutional government overreach. The 61-year-old constitutional law professor understood what most of his colleagues had missed. Hidden beneath layers of procedural language lay a devastating truth. If this bill passed, every future challenge to unconstitutional federal policy would require not one nationwide injunction, but thousands upon thousands of individual lawsuits. The math was staggering, the implications catastrophic. Raskin set the document down with deliberate precision. The sound echoed in the quiet room like a death knell for judicial protection. Rain began streaking down the windows overlooking the Capitol dome as if the building itself was weeping for what was about to unfold. That night alone in his office, surrounded by towers of constitutional law precedents, Raskin would discover the true scope of the Republican strategy. The bill contained exactly one exception, one carve-out, that would preserve nationwide injunctions for pending matters involving national drug policy. One case, one judge, one ruling they desperately wanted to protect. The hypocrisy was breathtaking in its audacity. The emergency hearing convened at dawn, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry wasps. Darrell Issa arrived with the confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards. At 70, the California Republican had perfected the art of political theater, his silver hair gleaming under the television lights, his practiced smile suggesting reasonableness while his eyes betrayed calculation. Behind Issa sat a phalanx of Republican staffers and conservative legal advocates, their faces masks of procedural propriety. They had spent months crafting the narrative. Activist judges were overstepping their bounds, creating chaos through nationwide injunctions that affected people who weren't even parties to the lawsuits. The cameras captured every gesture as Issa leaned into the microphone, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never doubted his own righteousness. He spoke of forum shopping and judicial restraint, words that sounded noble but masked a darker purpose. The nationwide injunction, he argued, had become a weapon wielded by liberal judges to thwart the will of the elected government. But Raskin had done his homework. As Issa spoke, the Maryland Democrat sat quietly, a manila folder before him containing the receipts that would expose the Republican hypocrisy. His fingers drummed silently on the table, not from nervousness, but from barely contained fury at the brazen manipulation he was witnessing. The turning point came when Raskin opened that folder. Inside lay a collection of documents that told a very different story about Republican attitudes toward nationwide injunctions. The evidence was damning when Trump had attempted to end birthright citizenship through executive order. It had taken exactly one nationwide injunction to protect millions of American children. Without that single ruling, the Constitution would have been rendered meaningless by the stroke of a pen. More devastating still was the documentation of Republican praise for Judge Matthew Kaczmarek's nationwide injunction blocking Biden administration drug policies. The same Republicans now demanding the elimination of nationwide injunctions had celebrated when they benefited from the very tool they sought to destroy. Raskin's voice, when he finally spoke, carried the weight of a prosecutor presenting evidence of a carefully orchestrated crime. The camera zoomed in on his face as he revealed the mathematical impossibility of the Republican proposal. Without nationwide injunctions, constitutional challenges would require 12,220 separate lawsuits across all federal judicial districts. The number hung in the air like an accusation. 12,220 lawsuits, each requiring separate attorneys, separate filings, separate arguments. The cost would be astronomical, the timeline impossible, the justice delayed until it became justice denied. The afternoon session brought forth a witness who would personify the human cost of the Republican proposal. Maria Santos, 34, approached the witness table with the hesitant steps of someone unaccustomed to the corridors of power. A single mother from Phoenix, she carried with her a manila envelope containing documents that would transform abstract legal theory into stark human reality. Santos had been caught in the crossfire of an immigration enforcement policy that federal judges had ruled unconstitutional. The nationwide injunction should have protected her. But a bureaucratic technicality she wasn't specifically named in the original lawsuit left her vulnerable to deportation proceedings that would separate her from her American-born children. As she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, the cameras captured every detail, her trembling hands, the way she clutched her children's school photographs, the tears that she fought to control. She represented millions of Americans who would face similar fates under the Republican proposal, people whose constitutional rights would become meaningless because they lacked the resources to file individual lawsuits. The irony was cruel beyond measure. The same policy that threatened to tear apart Santos's family had been struck down as unconstitutional, but the protection of that ruling extended only to the named plaintiffs in the case. Everyone else remained at the mercy of bureaucrats implementing policies that courts had already declared violations of the Constitution. Raskin listened to her testimony with the focused intensity of a man witnessing an injustice that demanded correction. The stakes of the Republican proposal crystallized in that moment. Constitutional protection would become a privilege reserved for those wealthy enough to hire attorneys and sophisticated enough to navigate the federal court system. The camera lingered on Santos as she concluded her testimony. her words echoing in the marble chamber with the force of moral authority. The judge said the policy was wrong, was against the Constitution, but I wasn't in the lawsuit, so it didn't protect me or my children. In those simple words lay the devastating critique of the Republican proposal. Justice would no longer be universal. It would be rationed based on registration, parceled out only to those prescient enough to join the right lawsuit at the right time. The moment of revelation arrived with the systematic precision of a prosecutor's closing argument. Raskin rose from his chair, holding aloft a document that would expose the true scope of Republican intentions. The paper seemed to glow under the television lights as he read the numbers that transformed abstract policy into concrete catastrophe. 12,220 lawsuits. Raskin announced, his voice cutting through the chamber's tension like a blade. That's what this bill demands, to replace a single constitutional ruling. You think that's justice? That's sabotage. The mathematics of injustice unfolded with inexorable logic. Without nationwide injunctions, every constitutional challenge would require separate litigation in each of the country's 94 federal judicial districts. The cost would exceed $50 million per constitutional question. The timeline would stretch across decades. The justice system would collapse under the weight of redundant litigation. But the most damning revelation was yet to come. Raskin's voice dropped to barely above a whisper as he revealed the bill's hidden exception. The bill says, and I quote, "except in pending matters involving national drug policy." That's one case, and it's their case, the one they want to win. The hypocrisy was laid bare with surgical precision. The same Republicans demanding the elimination of nationwide injunctions had carved out a specific exception to protect Judge Kaczmarek's ruling blocking Biden administration drug policies. They would destroy the tool for everyone else while preserving it for themselves. The camera captured the stunned silence that followed Raskin's revelation. Republican committee members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. The carefully constructed narrative of procedural reform crumbled in the face of documented self-interest. Issa's response, when it finally came, carried none of his earlier authority. His words felt hollow, scripted, desperate, the protestations of someone caught in an act of breathtaking cynicism. The mask of procedural righteousness had slipped, revealing the naked political calculation beneath. The session's conclusion arrived with the weight of historical inevitability. Raskin's final statement echoed through the chamber with prophetic force. This isn't reform. This is the systematic dismantling of constitutional protection for anyone without the wealth to wage individual warfare against federal overreach. The aftermath unfolded in the golden hour light filtering through the Capitol's western windows. Raskin emerged from the committee room to find a crowd of reporters, their cameras and microphones thrust forward like weapons in an information war. But instead of engaging in the usual post-hearing theater, Raskin made a choice that would define the moment. He walked to the marble steps of the Capitol and placed a single document on the podium, Maria Santos's deportation notice marked with a red stamp that read, "Constitutional violation, no relief available." The symbolism was perfect, devastating, undeniable. The camera zoomed in on the document, as Raskin's voice carried across the plaza with the authority of moral conviction, justice isn't procedural, it's principled, and they're trying to silence it. The scene dissolved into a montage of statistics that would haunt every viewer: 46 nationwide injunctions during the Trump presidency, 17 of which provided the sole protection against unconstitutional executive orders, one carve-out, remaining for the single case Republicans wanted to preserve. The final image lingered on the steps of the Supreme Court, its marble columns bathed in sunset light. The words "equal justice under law" were carved deep into the stone, but shadows fell across them like prison bars. The message was clear. Constitutional protection was being transformed from a universal right into a rationed privilege. As darkness fell over Washington, the true scope of the Republican strategy became clear. This wasn't about judicial restraint or procedural fairness. This was about creating a system where constitutional violations could proceed unchecked as long as they affected people who lacked the resources to fight back individually. The No Rogue Rulings Act was revealed as something far more sinister, a gag order against justice itself designed to silence the court's ability to protect constitutional rights on a national scale. In its place would rise a system where justice was sold to the highest bidder, where constitutional protection required not principle but participation, where the guarantee of equal justice under law would become a cruel mockery of American ideals. The camera pulled back to reveal the Capitol dome against the star-filled sky, its lights twinkling like tears for a democracy under assault. The building that had housed the nation's commitment to constitutional government now sheltered those who would gut that commitment in the name of political expediency. In committee rooms and congressional offices, the machinery of American democracy continued its ancient rhythms. But something fundamental had shifted. The debate over the No Rogue Rulings Act had exposed a truth that could no longer be ignored. The very people charged with preserving constitutional government were willing to destroy its foundations to achieve their political objectives. The story would continue beyond the cameras and committee hearings. It would unfold in courtrooms where individual litigants would struggle to protect rights that should have been universally guaranteed. It would play out in families like Maria Santos's, caught between constitutional promises and political calculations. But on this night, in this moment, the truth had been spoken with clarity that cut through decades of political obfuscation. The No Rogue Rulings Act wasn't about rogue judges, it was about rogue politicians attempting to place themselves above the constitutional constraints that defined American democracy. The final frame faded to black, leaving only the sound of rain against the Capitol windows and the echo of Raskin's words, "Justice isn't procedural, it's principled, and they're trying to silence it." In the darkness, the truth remained: when constitutional protection becomes a privilege rather than a right, democracy itself is under siege. The battle for justice would continue, but the stakes had never been clearer: not just the fate of individual policies, but the survival of equal justice under law as more than a carved stone promise on the Supreme Court's facade. The story ended where it began, with the recognition that some battles transcend politics to become struggles for the soul of American democracy. In revealing the true nature of the No Rogue Rulings Act, Jamie Raskin had done more than expose Republican hypocrisy. He had illuminated the fault lines threatening to tear apart the constitutional fabric that had held the nation together for more than 2 centuries. The cameras stopped rolling, but the story continued. In every courthouse where justice was sought, in every family threatened by unconstitutional policies, in every moment, when the powerful sought to escape constitutional constraints, the echoes of this confrontation would resonate. The gag order against justice had been exposed. Whether it would be defeated remained to be seen.